If you have a C5 Corvette, chances are good that you have the 4-speed 4L60E automatic transmission, and I can say this with confidence because approximately 70% of all of the C5 Corvettes made were born with an automatic transmission. Now, our C5s are somewhere around 25 years old, and you may be its first, second, third, or even fourth owner. Do you know for sure if its automatic transmission fluid and filter have ever been changed? And if not, you should consider changing them, and here's why. If you happen to be a numbers kind of guy, what does General Motors have to say about the change intervals for the transmission fluid and filter on our C5 Corvettes? And for the answer to that, let's look no further than our glove box, where your owner's manual should be. According to the 2003 Corvette owner's manual that I happen to have, GM says that if you drive your C5 normally, you only need to change the fluid and filter for the transmission at 100,000 miles. If, however, you happen to drive your C5 Corvette a lot in stop-and-go city traffic where outside temps are 90 degrees Fahrenheit or higher, or you live in hilly areas or in the mountains, or if your C5 often sees high-performance use, then you should change it at 50,000 miles. And in my humble opinion, that is a crazy difference in recommended change intervals. And by the way, it's a C5 Corvette, so it better be seeing some high performance driving. The owner's manual does not include a time component, and in my opinion, that's something that was probably just overlooked, because after all, look at something like rubber tires. Almost everybody agrees that after 10 years, even if they have a ton of tread left, they're essentially shot. And we've all seen cars that are kept outside most of the time, especially in the southern United States, where the sun is beating down on them daily. The effects on their paint and rubber weather stripping are real. Now, with regards to your C5's automatic transmission, I'm not so much concerned about the automatic transmission fluid, but I think it is reasonable to assume that over 7 to 10 years of heat cycling, the components that make up the filter may start to break down. And so with all of that having been said, if you happen to have a C5 Corvette equipped with an automatic transmission and you don't know the last time the fluid and filter in the transmission were changed, regardless of miles, I think you should seriously consider changing it. And I just happen to have an automatic C5 right here that needs a transmission fluid and filter change, so let's get after it. The first step is to get the C5 up on a lift, and if you don't have one, you can do this on jack stands as well. Just make sure it's level. Here's a look at the bottom of the C5's automatic transmission and the oil pan I will be using to drain the fluid into. Start with a clean pan that you know for sure has no debris in it. That way, if you were to find some suspicious chunks or materials or even needle bearings in the pan afterwards, you know they came from this vehicle and not the vehicle you worked on last week. Now remove the plug on the side of the transmission and let the fluid drain out. Then inspect the oil plug rubber seal and make sure it is in good condition. If not, be sure to replace it. Now go ahead and reinstall the plug, and you don't need to fully tighten at this time. The pan does lean towards the front of the car, meaning that the front of the pan is lower than the back of the pan, so no sense fighting gravity. I'll start by loosening the rear bolts a little bit, and as I move towards the front, I'll loosen these quite a bit further, and the fluid will drain out the front of the pan into the oil pan. This is always a messy job, so likely there's going to be some spillage, but we'll try to minimize that. Then let the fluid drain out of the front of the pan, and finally hold the pan up against the transmission while you remove the rest of the bolts, and now you can carefully remove the pan and drain the remaining fluid. Be sure to look in the bottom of the transmission pan for any chunks of material, metal shavings, or anything that shouldn't be in there. This one looks good with only the normal amount of fine material in the bottom of the pan and very fine metal on the magnet. Next, I'll remove the filter and set it into the drain pan and let this continue to drip while we proceed with the most fun part of this job, cleaning the transmission pan. Ideally, you have a parts washer for this, but I'll show you the old-fashioned way. Using some scrap cardboard and making sure you're in a well-ventilated area, use some good brake cleaner or similar solvent, a brush or two, a scraper, a screwdriver, razor blades, and of course a little bit of muscle to clean all of the debris from the outside and the inside of the pan. Then scrape off the old gasket, and yes, it can be very stubborn. Once everything is clean enough to eat dinner from, put a few dabs of RTV around the perimeter and set the new gasket into place. Now it's time to remove the seal that's in the transmission for the filter to sit into. And for that, I use a pick and just gently get underneath the edge of the seal. Then I expand it to a very small screwdriver so I can get the edge of the seal bent out, where I grab it with the vice grips and pry it out the rest of the way. So here's kind of a close-up of what's going on to give you a better idea. Here's the seal. Imagine it's inside the transmission, and I use my pick angled towards the center. You don't want to go straight up. You could damage the case of the transmission. And I'm going to apply a little bit of pressure and bend this seal inwards. In this case, I actually penetrate it a little bit, and then I bend it, and it's really soft, thin metal, so it doesn't take a whole lot of effort to bend. Bend it in a little bit, and now I can get it with the vice grips and get a grab on it, and that's when I can pry it out. And then before you put the new one in, just make sure you didn't booger up the surface. There's just a little nick right there. That's not going to hurt anything. And then to drive the new one in, I use a 19mm socket taped to the seal and drive it up into place. Now it's a good idea to compare the new filter to the old one and make sure they are the same, and then go ahead and lube up the tube with a little tranny fluid and push it into place. I forgot to mention this earlier, but after removing the transmission pan bolts, I like to put them in a jar with solvent and let that work to remove the grit while we were cleaning the pan. Now it's just a matter of holding the pan up against the transmission and installing the bolts. Be sure to start all of the bolts by hand so you don't cross-thread anything, and tighten them in multiple steps, working your way around the perimeter of the pan, and finally torque them to spec, which my manual shows as being 144 pound-inches. Now remove the plug and fill it with your choice of Dextron 3 compatible fluid until it starts to ooze out, and then put the plug back in. Now start the car, and with your foot on the brake, run it through each gear for a few seconds and watch the transmission temperature on the gauge cluster until it reaches around 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Then leave the car running in park with the emergency brake on and remove the plug on the side of the transmission. Fluid should slowly ooze out if it's at the proper level. If nothing comes out, check it with a tool similar to this one to see how far below the hole it is. If it is more than just a smidge below, go ahead and add some Dextron 3 compatible fluid with a fluid pump. Once the fluid does start to ooze out, then go ahead and replace the plug and you're done. If you're thinking about performing this task to your C5, I've included the links to some of the products and tools that I used in this video in the description below, so be sure to check that out. Tap the thumbs up below if you found the video useful. That way YouTube knows to share it with the rest of the Corvette community. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, and most of all, thanks for watching.